Hello and welcome to ThePrint. I'm here with Dr. Philipp Ackermann, the German ambassador to India. Thank you for joining us today. So we have a lot to unpack. Germany's getting a new chancellor. This was a significant election in many ways, lots of surprises, but also lots of suspense. So before we get into the specifics, can you tell us why this election was so significant?
So I think the elections were held prematurely. The elections were meant to be held in September, and now we did it in February because the old government imploded, one can say. So the coalition did not sustain their work, and therefore there was a necessity to have early elections, let's say. What was so interesting is that we had a turnout of 83%, which is absolutely stunning, and that shows how much people, how much value people attach to these elections. You had really many people who wanted to vote. Also, Germans outside Germany. There is an increase of demand of 60% of Germans outside Germany who wanted to vote. So you had a big engagement commitment by the German citizens to vote for these elections, and they wanted to make their voice heard. And the result showed, that the voice is very varied. It's a differentiated voice.
Yeah, it seems like a divided Germany has emerged, but it's not over yet. The new chancellor is likely to be Mr. Merz, and he's been in and out of politics for decades. He challenged Chancellor Merkel for the leadership of the party in the early 2000s. He's also a businessman, but he's never actually served as a government minister. But now first he has to build his coalition, which he wants to do before Easter. So what do the next few weeks look like as he does this?
So as of today, I think SPD and so the Social Democrats and the Conservative Party are sitting together to form a coalition. That is rather smoothly, I would say. And the goal is to have it by Easter. Basically, under circumstances, there is no other opportunity to get majority in parliament than having the SPD and the Social Democrats and the Conservative Party going together. So there is a sort of inherent necessity that they form a coalition. It won't be easy. I think it will be a couple of tough weeks ahead of us because Social Democrats have their grudge also with Merz. It's not something that goes smoothly. But at the end of the day, I'm pretty confident we'll have what we used to call a grand coalition between Social Democrats and Conservatives. And I think Easter is a date which can be achieved if you want to. So that's in a way the next weeks. So I think in the next 2 months you'll have a coalition negotiation. Then you have what we call the coalition treaty, so a paper, a solemn paper that is signed by both parties, and then they start.
Got it. I want to ask you about the AfD and Germany's relationship with the right wing. There's also a firewall in place. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
So it is interesting to see that for the first time in Germany, 20% vote for a far-right party. Seeing our history, that's a development that many people in Germany see as very dangerous or even very unfortunate. I would say it is they have doubled by numbers. Last time they had 10, now they have 20%, which is very significant. You should not forget, however, that 80% of Germans voted for non-extremist parties, and that your newspaper wrote that the liberal order is imploding. I can't see that, frankly. You see that 80% of people vote for parties from the left to the Greens to the right. That are supporting the liberal order. AfD pretends to support the liberal order. Many people think they do not. There are characters in this party which are dubious characters. I think that is fair and accurate to say. And therefore, many people in Germany feel that we should be very careful, very cautious in bringing people in government that have a non-democratic attitude. Now, AfD would really say this is not true and this is all a lie. But I think the feeling or the perception is that this is a party that should not be part of any government, and that's what we call the firewall. No? That's what, and therefore the Conservative Party has made it very clear from the beginning that it would not go together in a coalition with this party, and that's a free choice. That's something parties can decide if they want to or not. That's what is liberal democracy all about. If you have to choose a partner, choose the partner and try to get a coalition together. And the Conservative Party, I think Merz would count as a relatively conservative politician, more conservative than Angela Merkel, has made it clear that he doesn't want to join hands with this party. And I think it's his complete right, and maybe some would say his obligation to do so.
Switching gears a little bit, I want to talk about what happened at Munich a couple of weeks ago. In many ways, it felt like President Trump and NATO were on the ballot, right? We had Vice President J.D. Vance shocking nearly every European leader in the room, and he was, in fact, the only personal visit he made was to the AfD. So what kind of impact did this have on the election? Did it have any sort of impact on voter turnout? I also think that the left was languishing at the polls before that, but actually ended up doing better than expected.
So I think he also saw Friedrich Merz, by the way, not only the AfD, but he also saw the chancellor the incoming chancellor who was to be voted a week from Munich, a week after Munich's closed, the conference was over. I would say the following. First of all, we have to say the alliance between Europe and America is a very, very deep and old alliance. We are the closest allies, Europe and America, existing. There is no deeper alliance. So with this government, this alliance has what we live is some shaking of the alliance, but I would still argue that the alliance is very much alive and kicking. So that is important to say. We have to now find ways and means to deal with the fairly new American government. We have our experience with the previous Trump administration, so I think it is less erratic or not erratic is not the word. It is less difficult from our end maybe to get an impression of what they want and who they are. But it is true that J.D. Vance made a speech in Munich that was not very well received by the European public. And why was that? Because he said you should not exclude right-wing parties from your political spectrum. Now, I would argue, leave it to the countries. Every democracy is different. American democracy is very different from German democracy. I would say even French democracy is different from German, let alone Japanese or Indian democracy. Every democracy has an own way of unfolding and deciding. And I think in Europe, democracies are very much alive and very distinct. And I think we feel that there is no need from any other democracy to give us lectures on our democracy. So having said that, it is of course his right to express himself as much as he wants. I mean, this is freedom of speech. You can say whatever, and I'm not blaming him for holding the speech. I think that's completely his discretion. But I think the content of the speech, I would say, we have some good arguments to counter it.
But it also looks like we're seeing a rapid realignment across Europe. Merz also seems to have shifted his stance, changed his tune to America. In the post-election interview, I think he said something along the lines of America seems indifferent to the fate of Europe. What is at stake here? What can we expect?
So I will tell you, he will, in his foreign policy chapter or file, he will invest a lot in getting this relationship working with the Americans. I think that's it's a DNA in our DNA. We want this relationship to work, and therefore he will invest a lot in this. There will be misunderstandings, there will be disagreements, there will be also rough times, I'm sure, but we will survive. What is also clear is that under these circumstances, Europe has to come closer together. Europe has to join hands and try to get more independence and more independent acting also on foreign policy on a foreign policy stage. And I think Merz wants to do that. He is a convinced European. He has been member of the European Parliament. He is in the tradition of his party, a believer in the European Union. I see that coming. So you asked a very interesting question at the beginning. Has this Munich and Elon Musk expressions on German elections and democracy, has it had any impact on the voters? I would say not that much. I would say not overwhelmingly much. So basically, what you see, the polls were pretty accurate before and after Munich. So they always said that AfD, the right wing, the extremist party, got 20%. That was before and after Vance the case. So there is one phenomenon which you alluded to, which is interesting, is a rise of a very, very left party, sort of socialist party, and they got surprising 8.7%. And they had a very good way of mobilizing voters, young voters, and specifically, and had a very good program explained on social media. Social media played an enormous role. And they took up questions that people are really worried about, like housing and minimum wage, and that's why they scored phenomenally, because basically they were declared dead before, and all of a sudden you see them really coming again, and that's an interesting phenomenon in democracy, that if you do a good campaign, if you have the right means to appeal to people and to make appearances that resonates with people, or that resonate with people, then you'll get also a success, and that was shown with the left party. And again, I would say we are far from a situation where the liberal order is imploding. That shows also that we are far from this.
But what does this tell us about history, though? This is, I think the German people are very aware of history. Is this a concern? Did we see some anxiety over this in this election?
As you rightly say, history has played an enormous role in German politics. We have tried to come to terms with a very difficult history, and we still try to do so. It is still a very difficult chapter. And there is also, and this is completely natural, there's always a certain insecurity. And you see people who say, we have never again. And there's people who say you have to be also at one stage accepting a final cut. And this is now we have to think ahead and not look in the past. And so there is a broad range of ideas on the historic responsibility, historical responsibility that Germany has. So that, I think, the history weighs particularly heavy in my country. When you see in many other European countries, or also in America, people are easier with extremist right-wing parties. In Germany, they are not. Yet 20% of Germans vote for them. So what happened? And I think, I'm not an academic, an analyst of election processes, but what I can tell you is that there is a general uneasiness about many things. Now, that is not only because of the German government, because of the state of the world is very difficult. We have been victims of the war in Ukraine in many ways. We have over 1 million Ukrainian refugees in Germany. We have an energy crisis that came up we have supply chain problems in a very globalized economy like ours. So that's one thing. Then migration, Germany has been very generous in taking refugees from all over the world, over 1 million Syrians, hundreds of thousands of Afghans and Iraqis, now all Ukrainians. So people, whether it's a psychological perception or reality, people feel uneasy with the amount of refugees coming in the country. Maybe the perception of the threat is not will not match reality, because basically Germany is a pretty safe country, but people don't feel that anymore. So how this is a concoction with inflation that went up, with the housing problem, which is more and more urgent, that people feel sometimes that in the earlier days life was easier, in the 80s and 90s, and you feel, is that true? I doubt it, but there is a sort of nostalgia, sentimentality that is expressed in a discontent with the current situation. I think you can't blame the government for everything. You can blame the government for things. There's no doubt, but it's a general unhappiness with the state of the world and the idea that earlier the world was easier and better to manage. Now, how do you get to people and how do you explain to people that you have to live under the current circumstances is a task of the current government, I would say. You have to make this case and convince people that, there are also chances in the current state. I never mentioned climate change, which is basically for many people in Germany also something that, is a burden they have to come to terms with.
The Green Party has been significant for years, but there were also two recent incidents that were highly politicized where migrants were at the root of it. Do you think that played a role in the AfD's?
I think that certainly many people were so outraged about, we had 3 incidents in the last couple of months where migrants became violent in a terrorist way, I would say, and where people are shocked and really absolutely, it's like an earthquake in many ways. But when you look at it in a more specific way, you'd find out that one of these terrible attacks, the victim was a Syrian refugee. So the person who was killed, the kid who was killed was a Syrian kid. Another of these terrible attackers, strangely, was a supporter of the AfD, of the right-wing party. He was a Saudi exiled, a Saudi asylum seeker who worked as a doctor, and who was a sort of an anti-Muslim and had felt that the government of Germany would turn Germany into a Muslim country, and he was against it. And he said, on his posting that AfD is the only hope we have. AfD is the only hope we have. So what I'm telling you, that doesn't make these attacks any, lighter or less important. But what I'm telling you is when you look at the root causes, they are very different and very, you have to look at in a very differentiated way. Still, people, of course, see the fact, what happened, and people express their unhappiness also by voting for this party. I don't think that's the only reason, but it certainly enhanced the vote for AfD.
Migration was a big issue as well in this election. Lots of nuances between legal and illegal migration, especially post the attacks. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think this is important also for an Indian public, because, as I said, we will see more Indians in Germany. Now, I think Germans are convinced, and that includes, in a way, also the right-wing parties, that we need, in order to sustain our prosperity and sustain our economic model, we need skilled labor migration. And that's why we have a very good and very sound and liberal law for migration, skilled labor migration. But we, I think, have to reduce is illegal migration. So people who come for economic reasons, for very well understood and accepted, but we have seen that the illegal migration that coming to Germany has grown. It has been reduced under the last government, but not enough, I think. And this will be a task of this government, to reduce illegal migration and at the same time promote legal migration to Germany. And that's something that the government has also to explain to people. And I will tell you one thing, I think this is not so difficult to explain. The moment that, let's say an Indian IT engineer, an Indian nurse has a place to live and a job that pays the bills, people are completely fine with it. We have a country where 30% of Germany's population has at least one non-German parent, and 20% has 2 non-German parents. When you see the new Bundestag, the new parliament, 12% of the members of parliament have come from migration, have a migrated background, and that's very interesting to see that Germany becomes much more colorful in a way. But people are, aware that we need nurses in the hospitals that are well trained and good and nice caregivers, and whether they are from India or from the Philippines or from Bavaria doesn't make such a difference. But what they don't want is people who sit in the streets living on welfare and trying to. I mean, even if there is no threat or something, people don't feel easy to see them not working and undermining. That's the perception, the welfare system, and that's why I think this government is very, very keen on reducing illegal migration, but at the same time promoting legal migration.
Coming to India, what does India need to keep an eye on when it comes to Germany and Europe? We have one of the largest delegations of EU commissioners in India presently visiting. What does India need to keep in mind?
So I think, first of all, I would say there is a very good tradition in Germany that foreign policy is consensual. So I'm completely convinced that we have a continuity of the German government when it comes to their India policy. So we'll see the shift to India that Germany has undergone in the last couple of years will continue. So we feel that India is one of the major partners we have outside the European Union, and we will certainly increase our cooperation with India. And this in a context where more and more Indians come to Germany, live there, and work there. We have more than 50,000 students. We have 280,000 Indians living in Germany. We are very interested in getting skilled labor migration, and that will not change with the next government. So I think India will play also in the daily life of many Germans a bigger role. We will see more Indians in the streets of Berlin and other cities, and that is sort of a bond that will be people to people bond in a way that will grow in the coming years. So I think Germany, being the biggest economy in the EU, will certainly be one of the major partners in the West for India. And I'm very confident that the current government of India sees it exactly this way.
I think that's it for me. Well, on that note, thank you so much for joining us, Ambassador, and thank you so much for watching.